All right, looks like we are recording. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of Sustain SoCal's weekly community teleconference. Again, a great turnout. We're super pleased that every week we've had just a fantastic turnout of 100 plus people, and this is just shows we're hitting on a lot of cylinders here at Sustain SoCal. This is Scott Kitcher on behalf of Sustain SoCal. It's a business association accelerating clean tech economic growth and sustainability initiatives through innovation, collaboration, and education. Again, all of your mics are going to be muted until the end of our prepared comments. Also, please note that we are recording this entire session and we'll have it available on Sustain SoCal's site under the Community Teleconferences tab for your future listening pleasure. Also under that tab can be found further information, including bios on our speakers today. It's just a quick reminder, the theme for this series is exploring sustainability initiatives and clean tech that provide solutions, resiliency, and economic recovery and development through and beyond COVID-19. Each call is led by Sustain SoCal members and will address a wide array of verticals and initiatives within Sustain SoCal. Our teleconference today is entitled Residential Microgrids, a Path to Adoption. The format for our call today will begin with brief introductions by me, followed by our panelists' prepared comments, a brief panel discussion, and finally audience Q&A, at which point your mics will be unmuted. So let me begin by introducing our panelists today, for which we are very grateful to have. First is AJ Perkins, who is a highly sought after speaker and has written white papers and op-eds for the industry, and is quoted frequently in publications as a subject matter expert on microgrids. He has spoken recently at the largest solar and energy storage conference in North America and the largest B2B cannabis gathering in the world at Las Vegas Convention Center. He currently sits as an advisor to the California Energy Alliance for the Demand Response Task Team, which works with the California Energy Commission to update California Title 24 policy for 2022. He has worked with and being recruited by some of the largest energy companies in the U.S., like Lockheed Martin Energy, Enernoc, Sea-Power, GI Energy, and has serviced commercial and industrial clients' energy needs. Tim McDuffie is a senior business development engineer at Smarter Grid Solutions. He has extensive experience as an electrical engineer and has integrated solar plus storage systems totaling more than 120 megawatts over the past 10 years. Tim chairs the CAL-SSA Smart Grid Committee, where his main focus is helping utilities and developers understand the full value of grid edge DER in an increasingly decentralized electric grid. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker of the day, AJ Perkins. Please go ahead, AJ.
Thank you, Scott. I'm excited to be able to talk about this subject as always, and I think we're going to be touching on residential microgrids. But before we really get into the residential aspect, I'd like to actually ask Tim if he could kind of bring us, from a top-down approach, because their company really focuses on, originally started on a global scale, and now they're coming into the United States, and more specifically with us into Hawaii for one of our nanogrid projects. So Tim, if you could please, why don't you start us off with this top-down approach, and we'll continue from there.
Yeah, absolutely. The company Smarter Grid Solutions, we were founded 12 years ago, and the initial use case, that sort of got us going was a wind farm that was located in the north of Scotland on an island that required a upgrade of an undersea cable between the island and the mainland in order to accommodate this wind farm. And the overall economics of it were, I believe it was a $20 million investment, and essentially it was going to kill the project. So the developers of that wind farm came to one of the founders of SGS, a gentleman named Dr. Bob Curry, who determined that you could curtail 2% of the wind farm's production over 2% of the year, and not have to upgrade this undersea cable. So 10 years on, since that project was installed, it's operating, and they've actually gone ahead and installed over 50 megawatts of all sorts of DERs behind this cable that was only rated to, I think, accommodate 15 or 20. So with that, we spread into 4 of the 6 major DNOs throughout the United Kingdom. And our, bread and butter is twofold. It's Distributed Energy Resource Management Systems, or DERMS, which is essentially the creation of a central nervous system for the grid that allows for grid edge components to send and receive signals. And that's all tied back to a central operating brain, if you will, that provides a layer of real-time automation and control. And so from there, we've moved over into the U.S. We've been here for about 5 years. A majority of our work in the U.S. is in the Northeast. That's due mostly to regulatory policy that's favorable towards, forward-thinking and forward-looking grid innovation projects, as well as in Canada, where we're developing C&I level microgrids for a number of different utilities, Hydro One, Hydro-Quebec, as well as serving as the interconnection DERMS provider for everyday solar or storage or whatever combination of that there is. And so with that, I was we developed a relationship with Instanon. AJ brought us in and said, hey, we've got this there's a large demand for residential scale microgrids. And, they're called nanogrids to some extent, but really what we're talking about, what our interest is not operating things at the actual behind the meter. And that's where, Instanon starts to come into the picture, because they operate the asset behind the meter. And what our software does is aggregates everything, whether that's 100 assets, 1,000 assets, 10,000 assets, where we have plans and we're scalable up to, thousands and thousands of systems. And so that's in a very quick nutshell, that's sort of how we ended up working with AJ and his team at Instanon. And so we're working to develop ways to integrate all of these different resources in a very easily communicated way to utility systems, because that's usually one of the biggest challenges that you have, is being able to, because the utility doesn't want to monitor and manage 10,000 different widgets. They want 1 or 2 things that they could look at that's going to provide the services that they're looking for from a virtual power plant perspective, or just basic grid services. And so the question is, how do you marry that need with the need for whoever's owning and operating these assets to optimize their payback and maximize their value? And that's where our platform comes into play, because we're able to layer those two on top of each other, and we've had success with that value proposition. And so that's why, AJ with Instanon brought us in, and we're working on this project in Hawaii now, and it's very interesting. So, AJ, do you want to talk a little bit more about that? Or?
Sure. Thank you so much, Tim. So as Tim said, when we're looking at assets, within our microgrid, we can look at things like solar, energy storage, smart thermostats, all of these different things. Some of our microgrids were integrating CHP, combined heat and power, natural gas generators, fuel cells. So if you look at it from a simplistic standpoint, as it relates to our conversation today on residential microgrids, we're, for this particular project in Hawaii that we're doing, it's a small project. It's a 21 home community, and we're looking at solar, batteries, and a control, our IO hub, which is a advanced smart meter that will basically give you digital control over your circuit panel. So the opportunity that we see there is, microgrids are becoming a bigger conversation for a lot of people across all different sectors, but they're expensive, they're very complex and difficult to engineer, so they take time. Whereas on our side, we've developed these residential nanogrids or microgrids that are much more simple, they're much more deployable, and we're utilizing this as a way to show that microgrids can be aggregated. So if we're taking 21 homes, we could actually make it look like one as Tim said, assets. And that's the important part. I think that's where the union came in, is because Tim and their company, and there's other companies out there that can do this, but what we're looking at is being able to connect the utility to, say, the community. And that's where, by bringing in a company like Smart Grid Solutions, to be able to have them be that bridge for us is going to make it a lot easier for us to start aggregating, like what Tim was saying, these assets behind the meter. So instead of it looking like 7 to 10 assets on one home times 100 homes, it really starts to become really encumbersome for the utility. So we package it all looking nicely, and Tim and their team goes ahead and repackages it for the utility so it can be an efficient scenario. So I'd like to talk a little bit about our project that we have in Hawaii. Like I said, it's a small pilot project that we are doing, but it's important because we'd like to show the effectiveness of a affordable, small-scale nanogrid that can be implemented in a fairly quick time frame, especially now here in California when we're looking at public safety power shutoffs. Wildfire season is no longer just in a certain time of year. Here in California, it's become a year-round event. So we needed to be able to find a way to deploy these microgrids into homes at a quicker pace so that we can help protect families from either public safety power shutoffs or any type of shutoffs in general, whether it be on purpose or by accident. So we are using, like I said, solar, 10 kWh battery storage system, and our IO hub. And the interesting part is that our IO hub will basically replace the smart meter, the standard circuit panel, as well as what we call an essential loads panel, which is what you should be putting on a home that will help create the essential loads that are necessary when the power does go out. So our IO hub will be able to give the homeowners a detailed billing of every single one of their circuits. So it actually becomes a customer-centric model where the customer actually gets to see, exactly which circuit is utilizing how much power and how much that power costs. So it really becomes something where you can understand and start to really control. As it relates to the utility, now when we send that signal up to Tim and his team, they're putting it in front of the utility, showing them that, hey, we have all these assets. If you need power, we have the ability to, instead of curtailing and shutting off air conditioners, our system is able to go ahead and shut off different parts of the home that may be, quote unquote, non-essential. Coffee makers, dryers, things that aren't as essential. I mean, here in California, I would say to a lot of people, the AC is definitely an essential part of their living. So that's something that we're able to do on a very, granular level. This has taken us from our small little home development in Hawaii. We've also gotten engaged with a project here in the States, in California, in Paris, California. We're also doing a 37-home pilot for the veterans community. So this is a really exciting project for us. This is the first of 1 million homes that are going to be built for United States veterans. And what they wanted us to do was come in and create these connected communities so that they could have the ability to have the resiliency needed to ensure that power wouldn't go off. And in some of our pilots, we're also ensuring that water is there as well. So we're trying to create an environment that has that peace of mind of knowing that my home and my family are going to be safe. So this is going to be an interesting project because not only are we integrating solar, batteries, and controls, but we're also going to be integrating fuel cells. And this is going to be important because we're putting in a really large battery in the home. And then what we're doing is we're actually turning that community into a resource for the utility. And again, this is where Smarter Grid Solutions comes in, because now instead of the utilities having to put up their own peaker plants, which aren't really looked upon in a favorable way here in California, instead of spending this capex on a close to $1 billion peaker plant in California, now we can go ahead and utilize the resources of these customers in an aggregated fashion. And that really becomes a resource for the utility. So it really starts to put us into a situation where it is customer centric, it is utility supported, and everybody is now a stakeholder in the progression of this energy future. And we also will be integrating electric vehicle chargers and V2G capabilities as well, where we will be able to utilize these batteries in the car as part of the overall energy landscape for the homes and the communities as a whole. So Scott, I think that's kind of where we sit on our side. Do you have
Fantastic.
any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, AJ, awesome. Thank you so much. And Tim, thank you very much. Tim, do you have any follow-on thoughts to AJ there before I continue?
No, other than a lot of the use cases and value propositions, they're still out there to be discovered. We've identified a few based on our projects that we discussed a little earlier. I'm sure AJ has some of his own, and there are new ones being developed through tariffs and rate-based foreign sort of things, almost on a daily basis. And so the overall trend line towards the value of microgrids, both from a resiliency standpoint and just from a financial viability standpoint, it's going to continue to increase as these things all start to sort of converge on one another. And it's probably longer than what you hope for as an answer, but yeah, that's just sort of the thoughts that came out of AJ's presentation.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, AJ, you touched on it a couple of times, and audience, be ready, because I know I'm looking at the list of attendees on this call, and I know a lot of you are deep into the subject of microgrids, so I'd love to hear from you. So get your questions ready. If you have a new project you're working on that you'd like to share with us, this group, just briefly describe that. That would be fantastic as well. But AJ, getting back to the notion of the connected community, it's been around a while. So what do you think is the new innovative spin how would you characterize that now that you've described that briefly?
So for us, this is actually something that we've been working on, with our controls. A couple of years ago, we actually did a connected community in New Zealand, and this was a pilot program that we did for 22,000 homes. And we teamed up with the finance company, and most people know them as a PPA company. And what we did was they paid for solar batteries, a 10 kWh battery, and our controls in 22,000 homes. Our controls were able to segment 20% of every battery so that the PPA company or the finance company could utilize that to sell back to the utility. So this one was a unique scenario for us because we gave, Mercury Energy, the utility company, kind of, a Staples Easy Red button, right? Anytime you need power, just press the button and you got it. Well, the thing that we found out that was really interesting that we saw was a typical PPA company will get their payback within 7 to 10 years. But with this new revenue stream from being able to support the grid with that power from this connected community, their payback period went down to 8 months. So it was a huge opportunity for a finance company to realize an income stream that they never had available to them before. And we had to do this in New Zealand because the policies didn't allow for that type of stuff in the U.S., but they are now. A lot more progress has happened to give us that pathway, and that's exactly what we're doing. With our veterans community, we are becoming a resource for the utility. And, for this veterans program, they're basically coming in, paying one rate, and it includes utilities and all, Wi-Fi, all of that. But we're able to do that because we're monetizing these energy sources.
Yeah. So just to sort of dovetail on that, some of the work that Smarter Grid has done up in Canada, particularly for Hydro-Quebec, we had a remote community called Lac Megantic. And what happened was, they wanted to use renewable microgrids in order to replace existing diesel generators that had been serving them for the last 30 or 40 years. Apparently, there was a oil spill related to the fuel that was going to the generators, and so they said after that, okay, we're going to rebuild this, but it's going to be renewable. And so they went with our controller for that in order to provide resiliency to a very remote part of Hydro-Quebec's grid. And as AJ said, the reason for being in that area is because the regulatory environment didn't exist then, and this was a couple years ago since we've been developing this, but it's slowly starting to evolve now. And so from a regulatory perspective, it'd be interesting to we plan on taking our learnings from projects like what AJ did in New Zealand, what we're doing in Canada, to say, look, here's how this works. It might feel new to California, but in reality, it's not new. It's just something that the environment didn't exist to allow this. So I think it's heating up in California, but it's not something that's cutting edge, and nobody would be the guinea pig.
Fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. So, well, I know AJ, I know you know Sustain SoCal quite well, and Tim, you're coming to understand our ecosystem here, but we have a really broad spectrum of participants within our group, and touch on many aspects of microgrid and the extensions thereof, including DER, et cetera. But I'm just curious to know what you guys think in terms of how we might venture forth in collaboration in a broader, bigger way.
Tim, you mind if I take that real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
So for us at Instant On, it's always been what we call cooperation. It's being able to cooperate with others, but also seeing that there is a potential for competition. But when you bring these two together, you create an opportunity for all parties to learn, to grow, and innovate. And to me, it's absolutely imperative for our company and all other companies to be able to take this on. I mean, the lift is heavy. I'm from Hawaii, born and raised. California is now my home. I love California. And to see all the challenges that we're being faced with with wildfires, energy infrastructure, all of these things that's going on, I look at this and there's no one company. There's a dozen companies that could tackle this. But if we all kind of lock arms together and say, hey, we've got something innovative, we've got something new, let's go ahead and bring this together, that's where we can see some real progress. And it's absolutely imperative that everybody just says, how can I help? Because that's what's going to take this to the next level, is everybody working together.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, we have a number. I'm very active within the advocacy community, as well as within the Rule 21 working groups and the microgrid proceeding that's happening right now with the CPUC. So any voices that we can get that are pushing for these sorts of things as a California stakeholder, those are areas where I think collaboration could be very, very good, and then we could turn around and help educate, the members of Sustainable SoCal. By the way, I live in Santa Clarita, so I'm just north of LA. I'm technically in SoCal itself, but we're actually I live in the middle of a tier 2 fire zone, so I'm very, very interested about it, from not only for business perspective, but also for my own personal perspective. Any way that we can, marry the wants and needs of your members to what's happening in the regulatory community, and then also bringing information back from that to educate folks. Is how I see us collaborating going forward.
Awesome. Great, gentlemen. Thank you so much for that. I completely agree. We've got a lot of work cut out for us here. So I have several other questions I could sort of blather on about, but as I do this, be aware that you will all be unmuted immediately. So I would suggest strongly that if you're not planning to ask a question or contribute to the conversation, please mute your phone on your side of the equation. That will keep our noise to a minimum. And even if you're waiting for a question, please mute. Generally speaking, if you're not speaking, mute. That will help us all keep this informal structure that we have. So, and as I mentioned earlier too, I looked at the attendee list, and man, there are a lot of you out there that I know are deep into this subject of microgrids. So in addition to a question, if you have something you'd like to share and a new project or a new initiative that you're working on that potentially could collaborate with these gentlemen or Sustain SoCal generally speaking, please let us know. So Alan, are we unmuted at this point?
We can unmute right now. Are you ready?
Yes, please. Unmute.
Here we go.
Go ahead
This will take a few moments, everyone. So hold on, but please mute your own lines. But I'm going to unmute everyone. Please wait a moment.
So as you can see, we hear your lines if you're not muted on your end. So please mute your lines on your end so we can have as quiet a phone call as possible. All right, it appears we are unmuted now. So please, attendees on the call, feel free to chime in. State your name and affiliation, please.
Okay. What's the source for that bit? Is it the data system?
Any questions on the line? I'm not seeing anybody. Please just chime in verbally if you have a question, name and affiliation.
I have a question about.
Yeah, is that Eugene? Who is that?
It is.
Eugene, just state your name and affiliation, please, Eugene, and then go ahead with your question.
This is Eugene with EKC, and I was really pleased to hear you talk about vehicle to grid, which we're interested in, and it seems there's a lot of hurdles in terms of the electric vehicle people wanting to protect their batteries from cycling and stuff. And I also understand sometimes utilities are not that interested in it either, some parts of the country, and I'm interested in California, of course. So what kind of challenges do you face on that score?
I can speak to that. This is AJ, and you know we've actually been working with a few of the car companies for a while. Like Scott was saying, I sit as a member for the demand response task team for the California Energy Alliance, and I remember in the beginning when we started looking at demand response policy, they didn't even have batteries and V2G in the policy, and this was something that I was advocating for at a really big voice. And one of the individuals commented saying, hey, you know, AJ, V2G is so expensive, car companies don't like doing that, blah, blah, blah. But it was unfortunate because we had been working with Honda and Nissan, and V2G was a big part of their infrastructure. So here I am talking directly to these auto manufacturers, and you know, they're telling me specifically it's cheaper for me to build a V2G car than it is to build a V1G car. So it was really mixed messages. So now as we get into the actual home and create these V2G capabilities within the home, it's really making sure that you've got interoperability. And that was something that we saw in a very big way because, you know, everybody's building their own little widgets and technologies almost in a silo. And that's where Instant On actually came in, was to make sure that these widgets and technologies actually started to work together. So as you get through that hurdle of making sure that these things can work together and have that interoperability, now we got to present it to the utilities. And I can say that I've never had a utility, you know, push back hard. I think it's the way the message is coming across to them. Our message to the utilities are, our people are going to invest the money in their own infrastructure. They're going to protect their own families by getting a microgrid put on their home so that when you have to shut it off, they're not going to come and sue you. But they also will give you the ability to have access to their resources if you're willing to pay for it through demand response or other things, and the utilities are always open to that. So, I mean, when I hear that utilities fight back and push back, I have yet to run into a lot of negativity from the utilities, and V2G, I think, is definitely a big part of what's coming, you know, in a very quick way for everyone here.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Okay, great. Do you have a follow-on to that?
Not so much. The one thing I'll say about V2G is it obviously opens up a lot of doors, and it opens up a lot of different use cases, because essentially you have not only stationary batteries at a house, but now you have mobile batteries that can move around, and you know, people can have fleets of them all over the place. So it's an exciting new thing that's definitely coming. A lot of the regulatory framework and things that are required to make all of that a reality are in the works as we speak. So it's definitely something that we are excited about. We haven't done any work with B2G, but we understand the technology and are just waiting for the right opportunity.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. If you
So
can you
please
hear
say
me?
your name and affiliation, please, and then question.
Yeah, this is Mansour Abu Hussein from Glacier Technologies in Southern California. We just got a letter from PG&E saying that they're going to increase our rates by 14%. And I assume most of that is going to be because of all the liabilities they're going through because of maintenance problems. Now, for your technology, do you have to have a reasonably high density of existing renewables in the area to be of value to you, or this is only for new projects?
For us, we've actually, so the project that we're doing in Hawaii is actually all retrofits. So this is an existing community. The project for the veterans, the U.S. veterans, is all brand new build. So that's 1 million homes that's going to be brand new built. So we definitely have the ability to go deeper, into either scenario, whether it be new developments or retrofit, in an existing community. Having a higher density doesn't necessarily do us better or worse. It's really just being able to, for us, the opportunity of a higher density area with renewables gives us the ability to present a bigger package to the utility on the aggregation side. But whenever we step into an area, we typically do a good job at blanketing that area so that we can put our best foot forward to the utility to show as a bigger resource. But it doesn't really matter for us.
Yeah, and it definitely helps having more levers and more devices that you can control. But for SGS, a lot of what we are doing is actually work in remote areas for remote communities and being able to provide things like Black Start, which, if you're not familiar with Black Start, it's essentially, so if you imagine you're turning off a transmission line for a PSPS event, and all of a sudden you turn it back on and all that load spikes at the very beginning, whether that's turning on air conditioning, all sorts of different stuff. But what we do is out in the remote areas, and right now this is for Hydro One out in Canada. So we create small microgrids where the net load at the substation is zero, essentially. So that as they have to turn things back on, not only do the customers get to stay online with their own microgrids, but there isn't that inrush of current or that inrush of load to the utility. So, again, having multiple DERs and many clustered together, it can be very, very helpful, but it's not necessary.
So what's the minimum size, that you would consider worth as a project?
So
in megawatts or okay. Go ahead.
So on our side, I think that's kind of where our company coming together has created different opportunities. I know SGS, they've got some big opportunities that they do, and they do utility scale size. With them coming down into our world, I mean, right now, the homes that we're dealing with in Hawaii, their utility bills are as small as $120 a month. So we're building a microgrid on that scale for these small homes, and we're aggregating all 21 homes so that we can present it to SGS to present to the utility. So, if you've got a home with a $100 utility bill, it's definitely possible.
Great. Well, thank you for that question. Are there other questions on the line, please?
I have a follow-up question if you're looking for a question.
Sure.
Well, let me then, if that's the case, let me just turn quickly to Alan Ring. Alan, do we have any questions that have come through the Sustain SoCal info email?
One of them was partly covered already, but there was an inquiry about the differences between implementing a residential microgrid project for legacy infrastructure of an existing neighborhood versus brand new construction, and how that how that differentiates with what both of you are working on.
So I can say on an existing infrastructure, when we're building, when we're integrating this retrofit scenario, it creates challenges as well as opportunities, because when we come in, the big thing for us is now that we have our IO hub, we're able to utilize their smart meter and their circuit panel in a unique way. So now we're able to bring together innovations that are traditionally more difficult in a normal retrofit situation. So that's one scenario. On the new builds, it creates a host of new opportunities, not just for the customer and us, but also for the developer. Because when we come in, for the U.S. veterans community, we actually were late to the dance. They already had 2 or 3 companies selected to do various parts of the build, and we were just coming in as an aggregator for demand response. When they saw what we were able to push, they basically put us in charge of the entire energy infrastructure for the project. And by us being able to do that, we've been able to reduce costs, make more efficiencies, and then now we actually integrated the ability for the developer to participate in the revenue stream. So the developer is extremely excited, because traditionally, as a home developer, you sell your last home and that's it, you're moving on to the next one. In this particular scenario, they are now participating as, let's call it a quasi-utility for their community, and now they're earning a revenue stream 20, 30 years potentially beyond, the life cycle of what's there. So.
Yeah, and I would say going the next step up from the grid edge, up from a control standpoint, as long as we have that access through the IO hub, through AJ's equipment, it really doesn't matter too much if it's a retrofit or if it's new, because our deployment would be relatively the same regardless. The one thing I will say, though, is that newer inverters, easier to integrate with, they're designed to be integrated with, and you have a common communication logic or communication protocol that's implemented, particularly with smart inverters in phase 2 through California Rule 21. So on our end, not too much different, because at the end of the day, we're going to be integrating with an existing utility platform regardless. But the more tools, the more levers that we have to pull, the better.
Thank you, guys. Are there other questions?
I have a question.
Okay, name and affiliation and question, please.
Yes, my name is Robert Boulis. I'm a retired individual. My question has to do with how this technology might apply to the other end of the spectrum, individual property owners, for example, with capabilities, integrating those sort of disconnected individuals into a microgrid that floats on the existing infrastructure, or would you have to build new infrastructures so as to connect those people? And how does that fit into this whole idea of microgrids supporting the additional capabilities of the utility?
AJ, you want me to take that one? You mind if I lead on that?
Please.
One?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So we've actually run into this before, and when you're implementing a DERM system, which is again just a distributed energy resource management system, which is where you're integrating grid edge things like solar, storage, wind, hydro, whatever, into a utility system, it's something that doesn't happen all in one big chunk. Usually you have pieces that are added on over the course of programs and things like that can then, people, as it becomes financially viable for some, or the opportunities, the regulatory opportunities start to happen, it's always done with an intent to include as many folks as possible. And so we've actually integrated with companies who specialize in creating the portals, creating the user interfaces for exactly what you were just talking about, sir, which is allowing folks to participate in something that, their systems were never actually designed to participate in. Now that said, from a technology standpoint, I would depend on the age of your system, the capabilities of it, and what, essentially what you have to offer. But the fact that you have an existing system, I would say would by no means be exclusionary as to what we're talking about, because the idea would be to pull in as many assets as possible, and we have the capability to create programs to bring people online in multiple different types of scenarios, whether that's new, existing, retrofits, whatever makes the most sense.
Okay. Well, if I can continue sort of with my question, first to say I'm down in the southern part of Orange County, which is on the fringe of San Diego Gas and Electric's utility footprint. Mm-hmm. And because of medical needs in our home, I've built a very large solar system myself, and I'm in the process of designing and engineering a nearly a 40 kilowatt battery system made from salvage equipment that will essentially implement the ability for me to separate from the grid in the case of an emergency, or even if it's something that is economically valuable. And my motivation for doing this is that we cannot afford to be without power for medical reasons. So, and I have a background for being able to do this sort of thing, but if it fits into a larger schema, I'm interested in knowing about it. In fact, I heard about this meeting from an EV colleague that knows what I'm doing, and so he told me about this meeting. So it seems to me that with regard to our current utility, they're really pretty far behind the eight ball in terms of growing their basic infrastructure. So I opted to essentially design and build an independent platform that I could just disconnect from the grid if there were an emergency. But this is encouraging discussion, and I know of other people that are not in a development. In fact, there was a great deal of resistance to doing solar when I moved here 10 years ago, and I haven't mentioned any of the other development work that I'm doing because of the problems with the community at large here. But it's like two fingers pointing at one another. What do you do about that? And I just sort of wanted to mention this in this forum to see if it stimulates any other initiatives that will essentially blossom over the course of the next decade.
Robert, you mind if I jump in real quick?
AJ, real quick.
Go, please do.
So, this is Scott again, Sustain Southern California. So, Robert, I would just encourage you to maybe reach out after this is over. We can start a conversation and see how we might be able to engage. We're based in Irvine. We're a nonprofit focused on the economic growth of clean tech and the integration of sustainability initiatives, and do a lot of work in this space. Microgrid is becoming one of our core focus points, and will become a larger part of the organization going forward. So I would encourage you to reach out to maybe info@sustainsocal.org. Okay, AJ, please.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because Sustain SoCal is definitely one of those vehicles that help create these opportunities for us to move forward. I live in Ladera Ranch, so I'm here. I know exactly what you're dealing with, because I'm on the cusp of SDG&E, SCE scenario, and it really is a challenge. But I can say with certainty, we work really close with SDG&E. We're doing a couple of pilots with SDG&E. I've done a lot of work with SCE. So as it relates to the microgrids you're talking about, the reason why we came up with our solution for the home, and this is very personal to me, is I too have that same type of needs in my home. I have the exact same type of emergency needs in my own home, my parents' home right down the street here in Ladera Ranch as well. So these solutions were not just created because I saw a money opportunity. I saw that I needed to keep people's lives. So when we created this, it was exactly that. We doing solar, batteries, and these microgrids. And specifically, as we're going out into these communities, it really is for resiliency to ensure that the critical loads, not just essential loads, but the critical loads can stay on by implementing not just renewable energy, but storage and an ATS that allows you to detach from the grid to stay and operate in an island mode. So, by bringing SGS to the table, that's where Tim is able to help us create a better picture for the utility. If it was just yourself, then the utility is not going to look at you or me with any type of importance. But when we aggregate all of these together and Tim and SGS is able to put it in front of the utility, that's where they start to look at it and say, wow, this looks good for us. So it's just how we look.
I see. I get it. I get it entirely. So should I try to reach out to Tim?
No. Well, actually, what you should do is you should definitely reach out to Sustain SoCal, because through that group they'll be able to help guide you. I mean, the things that you're dealing with are multi-pronged. So
yes,
you're gonna need help from a host of different things, and that's where Sustain SoCal comes in. Is they're able to help direct you into the right places as opportunities and needs arise. So that's what I would suggest.
Okay. Well, I registered in order to join this. So my email is registered with Sustain SoCal, and I'll just say simply that my email address ends in @wireless.net. And so if the folks at Sustain SoCal would be willing to communicate my email address to anyone who desires to reach me, then to please pass on my email address.
Robert, sounds good. This is Scott, Sustain SoCal again. Not to worry, we'll get everyone connected that wants to connect here, and that's part of what we do at Sustain SoCal. So I appreciate your questions and your interest and your commitment to this, Robert. So moving forward now, do we have any other questions on the line?
Hi, my name is Jeff Stoddard. I'm the CEO of AIS. I had two questions, actually. One was, do you guys look at other technologies? Microreactors are starting to become something that we're seeing internationally, and there's been a COLA submitted by Ookla to the NRC for a new microreactor that's a 1.5 megawatt reactor that's designed for neighborhoods. Have you looked at that kind of technology to instrument? And that was my first question.
Tim, do you guys have any thoughts on that?
No. So I mean, as far as DER is concerned, we can interact with, or we can integrate with pretty much anything that's out there. I'm not familiar with that technology as of yet. I haven't come across it or anything that's required us to work with it. But as far as again, controls and being able to integrate with what it is that we do, it would just be a matter of tying in. I'm assuming it's going to be speaking on DMP3 or some common communications protocol. As long as that's there, it's just a matter of getting it tied in and then tying it and then getting it to function the way that you want it to function. So haven't seen it yet, but
no, you wouldn't. It's not commercially available. They just piloted their first machine, if you will, in Idaho National Labs. So
I was going to say on our side, for our company, we look for technologies that are already deployable. So we stay away from the R&D side because for us, when we go to market, we expect that it's going to be received very well. So we don't want to be backlogged, and I do know that the American developers for microreactors, they were looking at debuting this year a lot of their potentials, and that's where for us it's something that would be definitely a little bit more down the line once it becomes some sort of more traction on that.
Sure. My second question had to do with, so you're collecting this data, you're providing it in some format that I assume the major utilities are interested in. are you interacting or interfacing with like Maximo or SAP or any of those types of applications that a lot of these companies have?
I'm not familiar with Maximo or SAP offhand, but I can tell you that we have our own data historian. If if that's something that a particular client needs, we can also interact with existing data historian databases as well. In addition, we can integrate market signals from wholesalers or even from private financiers, which we've done in the past. So as far as where the data needs to come from and where the data needs to go, we're highly integratable into different platforms.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your question. AG, anything on that?
No, we bundle them at the home or the business level, and we package it nicely for SGS to send it where it needs to go.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so let's see. I know Eugene, you had a follow-on question. Are you still there?
I sure am. In fact, it's a more of maybe a comment than a question, and you're aware of this, but one of the barriers that you may end up finding is that there's three popular types of DC fast charging that you would need that kind of connection to a car to get the vehicle to the grid. And so there's the CHAdeMO from the Japanese, Tesla has their own, and then there's a CCS. Well, CHAdeMO, the Japanese, was actually built with vehicle to grid in mind, and the other two aren't. So that's a hurdle anyway.
Correct.
So it's not really a question.
No, that's good. Thank you for that additional comment, Eugene. So last call for questions.
Okay, I have a question.
Please introduce yourself and your affiliation and go ahead.
My name is Phil Tipper, and a friend of Eugene and Robert's actually, and I'm retired also. I was recruited, I have had solar on my house for quite a while. I was recruited for a program through Southern California Edison through a company called Swell Energy to install a Tesla Powerwall at my house, and I got incentives, some incentive from the program to reduce the cost of the battery, and also they got me into an SGIP position where I was able to discount the whole project favorably for myself. And I was recruited through advertising, basically, something I saw at a movie theater when we used to go to movie theaters. And I wondered about your guys' intentions to recruit, and are there incentives, or with your programs, are you expecting homeowners to pretty much foot the bill for the solar and the storage and whatever else they have, and then you provide value added for their existing infrastructure, or are there incentives that are available for the homeowners? Because for me, the incentives made the difference between whether I was interested or not in participating.
Sure. So this is AJ Edinson on, and I know the team at Swell. They did a great job, and what they did was they won a contract specifically for the aggregation of demand response for residential. So it was through this contract that they had to go out and aggregate X amount of battery storage for the utility. So that's one of the incentives that they had, and they actually did a great job of being able to put you into the SGIP program for the rebates. On our side, all the rebates, tax credits, and everything are still available. The added thing that we have is, as an aggregator, we now can put you into, let's call it the pool, so that you can now sell your energy to the utility. So rather than doing this net metering where you're producing too much energy and then you're going to try to sell it to the utility, we're saying you're going to produce the energy, the excess is going to stay in your battery, and we won't give it to the utility until they ask us. Because when you have to give somebody something, it's not as valuable as when they're asking you. So it creates a much higher value proposition for the utility because we've, number one, aggregated. Number two, we have it readily available. So as it relates to being able to put it in front of customers, our pilots that we are doing, the pilot for the U.S. veterans is an energy as a service scenario. So it's actually a housing as a service scenario. So in that particular scenario, it's just for U.S. veterans, and they pay 1 monthly payment, which includes the mortgage as well as all utility infrastructure costs. The one that we're doing in Hawaii is kind of like a Solar City, Sunrun scenario, where they will get a microgrid, and instead of them having to come up with the CapEx or the expenditure up front, we have a finance company that can come in and do it, and then now we just give them reduction. But now, instead of just solar, they've got a microgrid that can actually island itself. So there's a lot of incentives available, and for us, we're just doing it nice and slow, because eventually it'll start to take hold.
So would it be part of your plan in the future to do recruiting as there's more and more installation of solar and storage by homeowners? Are you planning to advertise to them, recruit to them, and say, we'd like to create a microgrid using, in your zip code or whatever, for the mutual benefit of yourself, the utility, and so on? Is that the way you would proceed going forward?
Actually, so we have a white paper coming out within the next couple of weeks with microgrid knowledge, and this white paper is specifically how to integrate a microgrid into an existing solar system. And we wrote this white paper because there's a lot of solar companies that do not do battery installation, and there's even more solar companies that won't even touch a microgrid. So our solution is we've created a plug-and-play-ish solution so that these solar companies can now have another tool in their belt to be able to go to their existing customers to upgrade it to a microgrid. We feel like that's going to be the easiest way for us to, try to reach as many customers as we can. We're not looking to take business away from existing companies. We want to work with them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for that question. All good questions today. Great interaction, great discussion. Why don't we stop it there, and then I'll just close with a few follow-up comments here and notes that I have for you all. Just keep in mind, all of you will receive a link to this recording and speaker bios. There will be an email address to Sustain SoCal for any follow-up questions you may have, and a link to engage with our microgrid working group that we have within Sustain SoCal, should that be of interest to you. That's a member-only vehicle that has proved to be quite valuable. And if you're not on our mailing list or would like to be, please just go to our website, sustainsocal.org, and sign up. It'll just be a brief kind of email sign up, and you'll be able to get access to all of our upcoming events and calls such as this. Let's see, just a quick note, we will be taking a break from our weekly teleconferences next week, as that abuts the 4th of July observance. That Friday, I believe, is the observed day for 4th of July. So we'll skip next week. We'll be back live again the following week, July 9th. And we'll have speakers from NG, and we'll be just discussing primarily at that point energy resiliency. So with that, thank you all very much again for joining us. AJ and Tim, fantastic presentation today. Thank you very much. With that, I hope to see you all again soon. Thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
That concludes our recording.